Did The Simpsons predict Twitter becoming X? Did they know horse meat was going to end up in burgers across the United Kingdom? Does this cartoon predict future events, or is reality forming around The Simpsons? These are terrifying Simpsons predictions that came true. In 1994, The Simpsons had a moment where lunch lady Doris pours assorted horse parts from a giant metal tub labeled assorted horse parts into the school meals at Springfield Elementary. It's a quick gag, just a part of the show's usual weirdness, but in 2013, that throwaway joke became one of the more talked about scenes in the show, and not for a good reason. A bunch of horse DNA was found in beef products in the United Kingdom. People were eating burgers, understandably believing that there was no trace of horse meat in it. As authorities worked to track down the perps, it turned out this was not just a one-off mistake either. It was a massive fraud. Companies were deliberately passing off horse meat as beef in all kinds of products, from frozen meals to burgers. The whole thing led to product recalls, public outrage, and a serious drop in trust for food companies. The Simpsons had foreshadowed the whole scandal with one random visual gag. Now let's look at a much later episode that is still over a decade old now. Yikes. Season 23, episode 21, Ned and Edna's Blenda Agenda. In this episode, Homer's phone briefly shows an app with a large X as the logo, amongst other more standard looking social media apps. If you weren't paying attention, you'd totally miss it, which people did back in 2012, but when Twitter rebranded to X in 2023, and someone decided to rewatch season 23 of The Simpsons for some reason, they were likely like, holy crap, Homer has X on his phone. The Simpsons writers didn't predict the exact company or context, but they did nail the idea of an X symbol taking over a major platform. Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, including ditching the iconic blue bird logo for a bold X as part of his vision to transform the platform. Now, is a company with an X logo really that out there and original? No, but it is interesting that this fictional logo was specifically meant to be a social media app. In the 1995 episode Lisa's Wedding, Lisa's future was a mix of predictions, some obvious, some way out there. One of the more bizarre moments was when the episode showed librarians being replaced by robots. Back then, the idea of robots in libraries seemed so futuristic, almost impossible. But in 2016, a group of students at a university in Wales debuted a robot librarian named Hugh. Hugh was designed to help library goers by guiding them to books and listening to their requests. Not only did The Simpsons get the idea of robot librarians right, but they also nailed the name, Hugh. And yeah, I'm guessing the university students named their robot after the Simpsons episode specifically, but still, pretty cool. Hugh was not the only piece of futurism predicted in this episode, though. The show also had a shot of a building behind London's Tower Bridge, and it looked exactly like the Shard. But the thing is, this building wouldn't start construction until 2009, years after the episode aired. Was this just a lucky coincidence? Well, considering The Simpsons' track record, I don't know. The Frying Dutchman episode of The Simpsons shows Homer at an all-you-can-eat seafood buffet. Of course, in true Homer fashion, he overdoes it, eating so much shrimp and lobster that he's eventually just kicked out of the restaurant, so he decides to sue for false advertising. Well, years later, a man in Massachusetts, Springfield, Massachusetts, sued the Golden Corral buffet chain for $2 million, claiming false advertising after being kicked out of the restaurant for eating too much. So yeah, he was essentially in the same position as Homer. Oh, and the case even ended in an out-of-court settlement, just like in the episode. The similarity is wild, especially considering the case wasn't some huge media sensation. It was just one guy trying to get back at a buffet that kicked him out for eating too much. I've heard pretty much every one of these Simpsons predictions, but this one's new to me. In The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace from 1998, Homer tries his hand at being an inventor, and during a scene he writes an equation on a chalkboard that seems like just complete gibberish. It's something nobody would ever have thought twice about. That is, if it weren't for the fact that when you break it down, the equation is shockingly close to predicting the mass of the Higgs boson particle, something scientists didn't discover until 2012. The Higgs boson is critical to understanding how particles get mass, and scientists spent decades searching for it. In fact, the equation Homer wrote turned out to be so close to the real thing that Dr. Simon Singh, a British science writer, pointed out the resemblance, saying it almost predicted the mass of the elementary particle. That equation predicts the mass of the Higgs boson. If you work it out, you get the mass of a Higgs boson that's only a bit larger than the nano mass of a Higgs boson actually is. It's kind of amazing, as Homer makes this prediction 14 years before it was discovered, end quote. So yeah, pretty nuts that a cartoon teased at something as complex as a fundamental particle years before it was even discovered. If you're a Simpsons fan, you probably remember Blinky, the three-eyed fish found near the Springfield nuclear power plant. Well, Life, again, decided to copy the show when a real-world version of Blinky showed up in Argentina. Fishermen there caught a three-eyed wolffish in a reservoir that's fed by a local nuclear power plant. Now, of course, the discovery was pretty disturbing. It's fun seeing a three-eyed fish in a light, frothy cartoon full of people with bright yellow skin. It's a bit more concerning seeing toxic fish show up in real life, especially one formed out of polluted water. Fishermen weren't thrilled about it either. Julian Zmutt, one of the fishermen, said, "We were fishing and we got the surprise of getting this rare specimen. As it was dark at the time, we did not notice, but then you looked at him with a flashlight and you saw that he had a third eye." The fish was handed over to local authorities for testing. Still don't know exactly what caused the mutation, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it was the radioactive water. Probably. The latest in the long line of Simpsons episodes fans look back on with added context is The Great Gatsby from season 28. In this episode from 2017, a character who is basically a Simpsons version of Diddy Combs without actually being called Diddy Combs throws an exclusive party where everyone's dressed in white. Looking at these screenshots, it's really hard to believe this episode wasn't just released like last month as a very obvious dig. Now, Diddy's parties were very well known in Hollywood. Not everyone knew about all the darker stuff going on, but the stuff on the surface, like the all-white dress code, some of the celebrities that would show up, all that stuff was pretty common knowledge. So this one may not be as surprising as other stuff on this list, but it may be the most eerie to look back on. Definitely an episode that hasn't aged well. One of the most shocking stories of 2013 was when Edward Snowden leaked information about the US government's surveillance program, revealing that the NSA was spying on its citizens on a massive scale. The whole thing shook people's trust in the government, and the reality hit hard when it turned out that the government was listening to private conversations, tracking online activity, and monitoring just about everything. The crazy part, The Simpsons actually predicted it years before. In The Simpsons movie from 2007, there's a scene where the family is on the run, and Marge says to Lisa, "Oh, Lisa." I'm not even gonna try. "Oh, Lisa, it's not like the government is listening to everybody's conversation." Right after, the scene cuts to the NSA doing exactly that, spying on everyone. So yeah, this moment hit a little differently after Snowden's revelations. Here's one of the Simpsons moments that's very weird. Feels like it was destined to happen. In season 2, there's an episode called Brush with Greatness, where Marge gets this letter from Ringo Starr after she paints a portrait of him. After years of waiting, she finally hears back from him, and this gives her the confidence to pursue her art. Sounds like the kind of heartwarming plot you'd expect from a cartoon, but a little too sweet to happen in real life, right? But in May of 2024, something very similar happened, but this time it was another Beatle, Paul McCartney, who responded to a fan. A woman named Adrian from Brooklyn had done a video interview 60 years before, declaring her love for Paul McCartney. Fast forward to 2024, and Paul saw the video, responded to it on TikTok and Instagram, and even invited her to a photo exhibition in New York. Before that, he'd also responded to 2 women from Essex who'd sent him a mixtape decades before. Alright, the whole Fox merger situation. If you keep up with the business world, you probably know about the Disney-Fox merger that went down in 2019, but if you go back to 1998, The Simpsons predicted this whole thing. In this season 10 episode, there's an establishing shot of the 20th Century Fox entrance with text below reading a division of the Walt Disney Company. Well, 21 years later, Disney purchased Fox for $71 billion, absorbing massive properties like The Simpsons, Avatar, X-Men, and a whole list of other stuff. Now, this one wasn't super far-fetched, to be fair. Disney is a massive conglomerate. They buy up lots of companies, but that's been happening more in the last decade or so. And the idea of Disney owning something like The Simpsons, which was seen as pretty edgy back then, was kind of unheard of. That's why it was a joke. The Simpsons has always poked fun at corporate culture, but here it was, predicting the exact future of not only the media industry, but itself. What streaming service can you find The Simpsons on now? Disney Plus. So first up we have Trump 2024. So back in 2015, there was a Simpsons short called Trumptastic Voyage. In a scene where Homer flies by a billboard, we see a sign that reads Trump 2024. Of course, not only did Trump end up running again in 2024, but he won. To take things just a step further though, life imitated art again when Donald Trump was arrested the same day the Barbie movie was released. Now, what am I referring to here? Well, in episode 14 of season 5, Lisa vs. Malibu Stacy, a news report is shown on TV documenting the release of the new Malibu Stacy doll, pretty much the Barbie of the Simpsons universe. At the end of the news report, Kent Brockman quickly slips in the fact that the US president has been arrested, and then the segment ends. So the US president of the Simpsons universe was arrested on the day of a Malibu Stacy movie coming out, and in real life, Trump was arrested the day Barbie hit theaters. Not on the same charges, to be fair. In The Simpsons, Brockman casually revealed that the president had killed someone, but the fact that the real life played out kinda like it did in The Simpsons, not just with Trump's political comeback, but the fact that he ended up being arrested on the day of the Barbie movie's release, just like the president in the cartoon as well, definitely a weird one. In the 1992 episode Lisa the Greek, Homer figures out that Lisa has a weirdly accurate knack for predicting NFL game outcomes. She gets upset when she realizes that he's been using her predictions for gambling, and completely distraught, she makes her own gamble. If she still loves her dad, Washington will win the Super Bowl, but if she doesn't, then the Buffalo Bills will win. In the end, Washington wins. All is well, move on to the next episode and more hijinks ensue. But here's what happened in real life, and just a few days after the episode aired, no less, Washington defeated Buffalo in the Super Bowl. Now, alright, it's 50-50 odds, big deal, but then the following year, Fox re-aired the episode. They tweaked it for the upcoming Super Bowl, changing some lines, adding the Dallas Cowboys to replace Washington. In the episode, Dallas wins, and sure enough, Dallas ended up winning in real life too. Next year's Super Bowl saw the two teams facing each other again, and The Simpsons once again re-aired the episode, updating another couple lines to account for the rematch, and once again, Dallas took the win. In the 1995 episode Lisa's Wedding, Lisa gets a glimpse of the future during a visit to a fortune teller. Fast forward to 2010 and Lisa is talking to Marge on her phone using something called a picture phone. It's a video call, which back in the day would have seemed so futuristic. I mean, people were still capturing video on clunky VHS cameras back then. But of course today we have FaceTime and plenty of other video calling apps. Video calling isn't exciting at all nowadays, depending who you're talking to, that is. Now, sure, other shows and movies have predicted similar technology all the way back to Star Trek in the 60s, but things get even more specific here. Keep in mind what year the video phone was shown in The Simpsons, 2010. Well, in real life, it was 2010 that Apple came out with FaceTime. Steve Jobs announced the breakthrough video calling technology as part of the iPhone 4 release. In the 2016 episode Friends and Family, Mr. Burns gets curious about virtual reality after meeting Professor Fink, who's rocking a VR headset. Burns decides to try out the tech himself, and before long, he's got a whole virtual family program using The Simpsons, minus Homer of course, as his test subjects. By the end of the episode, pretty much everyone in Springfield is walking around wearing VR glasses, living their lives in a digital world. While in our universe, just last year, in February of 2024, Apple released the Apple Vision Pro. This insane mixed reality headset, a combination of virtual and augmented reality that overlays digital media onto the real world that you are observing. I haven't tried it. I've only ever tried standard VR, which is the most 2025 thing I've said so far this year. But from what I've seen of the Apple Vision Pro, it looks totally sci-fi and pretty similar to the technology seen in the Simpsons episode. Not everyone is using this technology yet, but early adopters are already making this a part of their daily routines. In the 1993 episode Springfield, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Legalized Gambling, Springfield's version of Siegfried and Roy, known as Gunther and Ernst, are performing at a casino with their white Bengal tiger Anastasia. After yelling at the tiger to wake up and taunting it about how much better it is performing in captivity rather than living out its life in the jungle, the tiger starts to reflect on its once peaceful days before Gunther and Ernst showed up to trank it and drag it off to Vegas. Anastasia then goes into a blind rage and starts mauling her captors. Of course, this is all played for laughs, but there's no denying that it's eerily similar to a real-life event that would happen later. In 2003, Roy Horn, one of the famous Siegfried and Roy duo, was attacked by one of their animals, also a white Bengal tiger, during a performance in Las Vegas. The attack left Roy partially paralyzed and ended their act. In the 2008 episode Treehouse of Horror 19, which aired right before the presidential election that year, Homer goes to vote on an electronic voting machine. He tries to vote for Barack Obama, but the machine keeps registering his vote for John McCain instead. He tries 6 times, and each time it switches his vote. It's pretty absurd, but the joke hits hard given the whole conversation about voting technology, especially looking back after 2012, when there were a ton of reports that a similar glitch had happened in real life. In some states, electronic voting machines were flipping votes for Obama to Mitt Romney, which obviously raised huge concerns about the security of electronic voting systems. And it's freaky to think that a wacky gag on a friendly cartoon like The Simpsons seemed to be playing out in real life. The scariest part about this for me, though, is that I bet a lot of you watching this are too young to even remember the 2012 election, let alone the 2008 one. In the 2006 episode Homer's Paternity Coot, Homer believes that he's found his biological father, a man named Mason Fairbanks, who tells him a tale about a lost emerald treasure in a sunken shipwreck called Piso Majado. They take a submarine to go find the treasure, but of course, things go wrong. Homer ends up getting stuck in the wreck and starts running out of oxygen in his sub. Funny in The Simpsons, but in real life, this would of course be a pretty horrific situation to find yourself in. A situation that 5 tourists would find themselves in years later. A lot of people started drawing parallels to this episode and the Titan submersible accident. On June 18th of 2023, 5 people boarded the OceanGate's Titan submersible to explore the Titanic wreck in the Atlantic Ocean. Sadly, within 2 hours of the dive, the sub lost communication and it then imploded, killing everyone on board. Now, it's not like a small submarine getting stuck underwater is a novel story concept, but there's another connection to The Simpsons here. One of The Simpsons writers actually went on to make a few trips with OceanGate to see the Titanic wreck. He later told the US Sun that every single time there were issues with the communication systems. In the 1998 episode Lard of the Dance, Homer gets the idea to start stealing grease to make money, and who better to enlist for a job like that than his very own rascal of a son, Bart. Bart ends up stealing grease from the school cafeteria and Krusty Burger. Pretty standard, silly Simpson stuff, but years later, this happened for real. In 2008, as the price of oil started to skyrocket, a black market for used grease started coming about. Restaurant grease thefts were becoming a big problem. An article in the New York Times that year even came out with a story where a man stole over 300 gallons of grease from a Burger King. And if I had to choose one fast food restaurant that is basically our version of Krusty Burger, it would be Burger King. I mean, sure, McDonald's has Ronald McDonald as a mascot, another clown, but they don't have burger in their name. Plus, Burger King had partnered with The Simpsons for a long time, releasing all those awesome Simpsons Treehouse of Horror kids meal toys in the 2000s. Good old days. Only reason to go to Burger King, in my opinion, actually. I will die on that hill. Burger King, one of the worst fast food restaurants. Next up, 3D printed food. We're gonna take a trip back to the episode Future Drama from 2005. In this one, Marge takes a picture of Bart and Lisa before prom, then turns it into a 3D printed cake. At the time, this seemed completely out of the realm of possibility, right? Just some ridiculous cartoon future technology, but now 3D printed food is a real thing. It's not an everyday thing, but the technology does exist. You have companies like Food Inc. who have pop-up restaurants where everything from the utensils, the furniture, and yes, the food is 3D printed. They describe it as a one-of-a-kind gourmet experience where fine dining meets futuristic tech. So it's happening. But the question is, will 3D printed food be something you can just whip up in your kitchen one day? Well, I don't see why not. Now, the Simpsons are not the first to envision something like this. You have the food replicators again in Star Trek, and I'm sure there are others, but there is a difference here. In Star Trek, the replicators turn energy into food, whereas in The Simpsons, it is very specifically 3D printing. Back in Season 3, Episode 24, Brother, Can You Spare Two Dimes?, Homer's brother Herb invents a device that helps parents understand what their infants' cries mean, and you guessed it, turns out technology like this isn't actually that far-fetched. There's a company called Zound Dream that's actually working on something similar. They've created technology that analyzes infant cries to figure out whether they're hungry, tired, or just fussy. According to their website, their system looks at things like cry acoustics, brain signals, and even facial expressions to figure out what's going on. So yeah, it's a real thing in development and could be on the market sooner than you think. And that's everything. Well, with all that said, I've been your host, James, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.